We cover our wide-ranging apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View.
Day, also National Coloring Book Day. My name is Nick Pitts, and I am co-hosting Point of View this afternoon. Kerby Anderson, how are you today?
I'm very good, and it is fun to see you in the captain's chair. I don't mind being in the co-host chair today.
I am the captain.
And we have a great round table, so we'll just be kind of directing traffic a lot of the time.
I know.
Here.
I completely
very
agree.
Smart people here.
Completely agree. I'm going to take the devil's advocate role pretty much all day today. And so joining us at the round table today, we've got Grant Skeldon of Initiative. Grant, how are you today?
Pretty good.
You're in Dallas right now. Just need to know. Central Time Zone. Where have you been, Grant? You've been everywhere lately.
Hashtag Dallas, Dubai, Durban. But I'm back.
Yeah. South Africa.
Yeah.
Dubai. This guy has been traveling more than you, Nick.
No, I'm just happy to be on Dallas roads in the middle of rainy season right now, I feel like. So so glad to have you with us, Grant. And then Ryan, man, how are you today?
I'm great.
Okay,
I'm great.
So Ryan Casey Waller, the Reverend from Church of the Incarnation, and also is going to be coming out with a book called Unbroken.
Yeah,
Broken. Unbroken is
was a great book.
Laura Hillebrand. Yeah, and so very neat. So tell us.
Well, if it does as well as that, you'll be in great shape.
Yeah, no joke, right? Love it.
Tell us a little bit about Broken, Ryan.
Yeah, so Broken is a collection of essays, 30 different essays that explores vulnerability. So the whole idea, the premise of the book is that we're all broken, in some deep and fundamental way. But the good news is that Jesus blessed the bread before he broke it. So deeper than our brokenness, deeper than our woundedness, is this blessedness, which, we see at the very beginning of Scripture in Genesis 1-2, right? That the image of God, right, is what runs deepest, to all human beings. And so we're made in the image of God. And so there's this, hopefully, through lots of sort of sad stories that I tell not only about myself, but about other people that I've run into, the book offers that hope, right? That nothing is beyond the redemption of God and his love. So
that's great. And so if our audience is interested in pre-ordering that's available on Amazon, correct?
It is, yeah. You can get it now on Amazon as a Kindle and or paperback, or you can purchase it straight from the publisher at forwardmovement.org.
That is great. And when is the due date for that? When's it drop?
It'll be out on September 4th. And if you're in Dallas, September 5th, we're going to have a big book release party down at the Crow Collection of Asian Art, 7 p.m. Would love to have you. It'll be a good time. Barnes & Noble will be there selling books, so it'll be fun.
And, as a millennial, I am all for parties, Kerby.
That's for sure.
I am anywhere that there's a party, that's the place where I want to be. So that'll definitely be a book that I buy my mother, if she's listening, on September 14th. Sorry to ruin the surprise. And so, but nevertheless, we've got a packed show today. We're just talking about some cultural issues today, but specifically going to be looking at these from a millennial perspective, as well as hear the wisdom that comes from Kerby Anderson as he provides us unique and intricate context, which is always so helpful. And the first article that'll be out is also on our website. And it's an op-ed by David Brooks on the New York Times. And so, Kerby, as we've seen for the past year, David Brooks has really just been almost in this kind of negative, kind of antagonistic standpoint, critical standpoint of President Trump, but really wanted to kind of shift from that. So it's not really anything new that he's kind of taking that stance. But what I thought was so interesting relative to our purposes is that this understanding of what's the conception of man. Brooks really highlights the personality, I guess you could say the premise of I guess President Trump, and then he's also gives out Anthony Scaramucci, but then also, what does it look like to be a man in today's culture? Now, Kerby, I don't know about you, but I know that there's such a thing as a sharp-dressed man, according to ZZ Top. I know that there's a simple man from Leonard Skinner. I also know there's a piano man from Billy Joel. But I grew up in an age with Home Improvement and Tim the Tool
man.
Yeah. Taylor. And so,
remember that?
I wish I could. I wish I could bark like that. And so there's just this understanding of men. So Grant, I want to throw it to you first. As you give attention and give ministry to millennials, do you think there's a proper understanding of manhood? What do you think are popular conceptions of manhood? I'd just love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, so I think one thing I noticed was, I think that it seems like from movies in the 80s and 70s that a man used to be kind of like the jock in high school. And now I actually think that is kind of changing to where, luckily, it can be more than just brawn. It can also be brains, or it can be even creativity. For example, I just started watching. Have you ever seen this show or heard of this show called Riverdale? Okay, it's like if Archie, that cartoon or that comic, they made a show off of that, but it's loosely off of that. And all that to say is the main character, Archie, is not only a football player or some athlete like I think they were in the comic, but he's also a singer and a writer. And if you notice High School Musical, he wasn't just the jock. He was also the jock that had a creative side to him. And so I don't know what that says of our culture. I just think that it is changing a little bit more. But it used to definitely, when I was growing up, it felt like being a man meant being only strong. And creativity was kind of for when you were a child.
Yeah, that's a great point. Ricky Shillette of Living Hope Ministries makes a great dichotomy between two different types of men. There's the rough and tumble, and then there's the soft and sensitive type of men. Both are men. I think you can both see both of those in the biblical narrative. I mean, you think about the rough and tumble, you obviously have to think about a David individual. Yeah. But then you think about the sensitive, you think about Bezalel, who was the one that God gave this particular spirits in Exodus 36, rather, to be able to fashion the temple. So, Ryan, from your perspective, working in the church, working on the ground floor, really at the front lines, would you say that there's a proper conception of what a man is?
No. I think that men, a lot of times today, are really confused about what it means to be a man, only because now, sort of as Grant was getting to, we do view it from a more complex view. So even if you back up like to the generation of my grandparents, right? The common understanding was that, well, what does a man do? A husband and a father. Okay, well, your role is to perhaps go out and simply provide, right? Yeah. So if you do that, then, check it off. You weren't necessarily expected to be completely emotionally available to your wife or your children or all these other things. And now we're living in a time in which this is expected, right? So men are expected to not only provide, but also be incredibly in tuned emotionally to all these different relationships. And so be really, really strong, but also at the same time, be super, super sensitive and emote, but don't emote too much, because then you're not really a man. And there's this sort of, I think we've arrived at a place where a lot of men feel stuck, and they don't know what it really means to be a man. And it's further complicated by the fact that we don't have clear initiation rites anymore, right? Good. So as Brooks has written about before, and other people like Richard Rohr talks about this, if you really look, at history, we've always had these sort of initiation rites in which men were given the opportunity as young boys to see, well, what does it mean to be a man in our culture? And it's going to be different in all sorts of different cultures. But now we sort of don't have that. And so I think we're kind of awash.
I think that you've been to Israel a few times, right? Mm-hmm. How many times have you been?
I've just been once.
Okay, once. One thing that I noticed about the kids in the IDF, and I say kids because I think once you hit 18, you have to join the Israeli Defensive Forces, is I remember going up to a group of it was actually girls, and it was weird because they sounded like and acted like freshman girls you would see in college, just giggling, having fun. The difference was they're in military uniform, and they have like rifles in their hand, but they're just having fun. All that to say, let's tell the story when I get back.
All that to say, we're gonna pick up with this conversation. And what is the definition of a man as soon as we get back right after this?
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, the Trump administration has been rolling back federal regulations at a significant rate. One report estimates that deregulation has removed more than 800 regulations. This would include 469 planned regulatory actions that were part of the Obama administration's regulatory agenda, and another 391 active regulatory proceedings that were actually reclassified as long-term or inactive. Now, you may remember that Donald Trump signed an executive order calling for a regulatory freeze. He also signed an executive order that required an agency to identify 2 federal rules to eliminate for every 1 regulation proposed. It turns out that the administration has done much more than this. The 1 in, 2 out order was a nice goal, but bureaucrats have exceeded that goal by eliminating 16 old rules for every new one introduced. Wayne Cruz remarked, "No one is surprised that the Trump administration would issue considerably fewer regulations than the Obama administration, but what is a surprise is that the president is the least regulatory president since Ronald Reagan." OMB Director Mick Mulvaney told reporters, "I cannot express to you enough how much things have changed when it comes to the regulatory burden, the attitudes towards the regulations in this country, and you're going to see more of that in the next 8 years." Of course, there is opposition, especially in the courts. The D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals ruled the other day that Scott Pruitt and the EPA could not postpone an Obama administrative rule concerning methane emission. Wall Street Journal editors warned that we should look for a deluge of such lawsuits as progressives resort to the courts to compensate for their defeat in 2016. And this latest decision highlights the stakes in future judicial nominations. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we are back, and I am Nick Pitts, and I'm joined at the round table with Kerby Anderson, Grant Skeldon, and Ryan Casey Waller. And right before the break, Grant was telling us a story about Israel and the IDF. Grant, remind us again.
So basically, I went up. It was a group of about 20 girls with rifles, IDF. They're joining the army, and I said, why do you think that you guys at your age are so much more mature than I think American girls at 18 years old? And they just burst out into laughter. I was like, man, why is this so funny? And then the first girl finally spoke, and she said, you know, when we turn 18, we have to join the military and defend our country from every border. When your girls turn 18, they go and party and go to college. And so it always made me think, you know, if I was 16, 17, I wouldn't be thinking about what college I'm going to. I'd be thinking about, am I mature enough to, I won't die because I'm irresponsible when I go to the military. But in America, especially, I think Hispanics, we have quinceañera. This is a time in which there's expectations. But what is the deadline that drives the decision of maturity in America for young men?
That brings up a really great point. So my Israel story that talks about that kind of clash of civilizations, I guess you could say, would be I'm just an adventurer by and large, and so I'm just kind of rebellious by nature. And so our group had just gotten into Israel, and I decided that I always wanted to go see the Knesset. And so the Knesset is high atop a hill, and I'm kind of going by myself. I don't really know what I'm doing. And when I don't know what I'm doing, I'm just smiling and nodding at everybody. And so as I'm making my way up the Knesset, there was a shift change that was happening. And so as one group of soldiers, again, these 18-year-old guys are coming down, and I am this lone American. And just imagine hundreds of 18-year-olds with rifles at their side just dangling. Yeah. And in my head, I'm thinking, 18-year-olds in the U.S. with rifles, I would not want to be anywhere around that. And so I was just shocked by that. And so, Kerby, help us better understand. You were talking about the men's movement earlier.
Yeah.
What really just happened in the 80s and how that helped men to a certain degree and also helped create kind of some of those special
Ryan's
moments.
point is a good one because we've never quite understood in American culture when a boy becomes a man. Let's go back to Jewish culture. There's a bar mitzvah, there's a bat mitzvah. It's very clear. What's ours? Well, maybe when you get your first car, you get your driver's license. Maybe now when you get your cell phone, I don't know what it is, but that really kind of caused a situation in which in the 1980s, there was first the secular men's movement. And then on top of that came the Christian movement, which was Promise Keepers. And you might remember that there were only a few books out by books about men by various Christian authors. I have a whole shelf that's just groaning under the weight of all these books now. And part of it was to just begin to think about what it means to be a man and when you become a man. And so there have been people writing about various kinds of initiations, various types of ways in which you place your blessing on your child and those kinds of things. But again, if young people grow up and they've never heard from their father that now you're a man and I love you and I'm proud of you, then you can see why so many of those different organizations and movements really began to spring up because they're still trying to figure out what it means to be a man.
That's really good. So I've heard a couple of things, and so it's largely put men as recipients. So we've been talking about right now the recipients of the Father's blessing, recipients of the Father's love, recipients of the Father's words. Ryan, I'm going to go to you to answer the age-old question right now that's probably been plaguing America for a little bit now. But what does it mean to actively be a man in today's culture?
It's a great question. I don't think there's necessarily a succinct answer, but at least has something to do with taking responsibility for oneself, first and foremost. And then I think, similar to what David Brooks was getting at in his article by kind of hearkening back to Greek culture, it's that taking responsibility not only for myself, but then recognizing that my existence isn't just for myself. I'm going to take now whatever it is that I have to offer and give that to the good of others, be it the intimate relationships that I have, and then wider, the communal relationships. So like I exist here, I have something to offer, and I'll go and give that in a self-sacrificial kind of way. Now, what's complicated about this is that I do think that there needs to be an actual transition from, boyhood to manhood. But what gets complicated about this is that means that to be a man is something that can always be taken away. Now, when you hear this sort of language, right? Well, he's not really a man, or, a man wouldn't do this sort of thing. And so that can really plague men, because manhood does look differently, as we were saying earlier. And so I think there's always still this question in men's mind, like, am I really a man? And have I somehow lost my manhood? And if that has happened, then what? I mean, there's this serious insecurity around it. But I think it has something to do with responsibility for oneself and then the giving of oneself for the betterment of others.
Do you have to turn in your man card? That's always a question some of these guys ask, and it's a joke, but there's some history behind that, isn't there?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I am very much a Broadway guy. And so my friends in Tennessee traditionally are not Broadway guys. And so whenever I would just boast about going to see Dear Evan Hansen or Hamilton or Newsies and glowing about that, it was almost as if I was glowingly giving up a part of my man card for enjoying those things. And so it's just very fascinating. And so, Grant, is there anything that you would add to the definition of what it means to be a man?
I do think kind of piggybacking on what Ryan said, it reminded me of a quote I saw when I first got into this whole millennial conversation, and it was that maturity doesn't come by age. Maturity comes by acceptance of responsibility. And so in some ways, that's maybe why there's a prolonged adolescence, is we are getting older. But some would label millennials as boys that can shave because they're older, but they haven't accepted responsibility. And so I think I like Jesus as a model just because I do think that he wasn't a pushover. And I'll be honest, like when I wasn't a Christian, I became a believer at 17 years old. I struggled with Christian manhood because I felt like a lot of the Christians in the church my mom would take me to were kind of pushovers. And it wasn't humility. It was just like passive Christian men. But when I saw that Jesus wasn't like that, that I'm not saying I want a guy that's always turning over tables. That's not a healthy lifestyle. But like he was a stern and strong man. I think actually on this end now of the Christian walk, I'm trying to relearn that there are those sensitive sides to just following God's heart. Like this morning, actually, ironically, I'm reading David, and the Ark of the Covenant's coming into the temple, and basically he says he danced with all his might. And I'm like, man, I would maybe fight with all my might or passion with all my might, but dancing like that with all my might, what does it look like? I was like, God, do I dance with all my might? And I know the reason why I wouldn't is because I'd care what other men would think if I did. And so learning that there's these times, it's very sensitive times where a man strong as David can also be meek.
So push back against me here, because I agree with you on the kind of the passivity, the kind of pushover, and I kind of consider it the Ned Flanders effect of our culture. So you've got from The Simpsons, you've just got this doodly individual in Ned Flanders that very much is just to a large degree, he really is just that pushover. He's that really nice guy that really you don't see any strength except 2 times in this 30-year series that continues to run on. Are you seeing that in the church right now?
Yeah, and I think it's to Grant's point. Like, I think a lot of men never really understand what the spiritual life looks like for them. And so what they do is, instead of really asking the questions, right, and really taking discipleship serious and learning what it means to be a person that looks like Jesus, they just say, okay, I'm supposed to be nice. That's what it is.
No, I
right?
agree with that.
And so they push everything down. It's like, well, if I'll just be nice, well, then that's it. And we all know what that basically ends up doing is exploding, right? Because if a man just tries to be nice, that's not going to lead him really anywhere.
I think that's one of the characteristics I so admired about Jesus, and then specifically Moses, Kerby, is that idea of meekness, being quiet strength, not necessarily wanting to exert myself and flex every time that I can demonstrate strength, but have the self-control to be able to hold back at that particular time.
Well, and again, I think you see various examples that give you a range of possibility. You mentioned David just a minute ago. Certainly, David was a military man. And it's rare that you see a military man who's very strong who also is a poet. I mean, just think of General Mad Dog Mattis as writing a piece of poetry. Think of one of the examples we used in here was General Washington or General Marshall. Those are not in the same body, yet they are in that individual. Or in Jesus, you know, one minute he's overturning the tables, but another minute he's talking about consider the lilies of the field. So I think it really gives us a range, and so we recognize that there isn't one size that fits all biblically, but there's a lot of freedom within what it means to be a man, but there are some essentials, and virtue and honesty and authenticity and transparency are certainly some of those attributes.
I couldn't agree more. And there's that, and again, if you look back at ancient Near Eastern culture, one of the stark contrasts relative to characteristics of the Christian walk was humility. It was very much humility and meekness were 2 characteristics that were not valued during that particular time. But yet Jesus is offering us a new particular way. So that's what we've thought so far about being a man. Do you have your point of view? We'd love to hear from you. So if you want to, you can call in at 800-351-1212, 800-351-1212, and we'll continue this conversation right after the break.
With the way things are going right now, there's got to be a source of truth somewhere.
Eric lives in California, and he's listened to Point of View since he was a child hanging around his dad's auto shop in Nevada. He says it's his only trustworthy source of information about what's happening in the world.
Well, I feel bad because I have not been donating, and I'll tell you what, I'm getting back to that because just recently I realized with all the junk going on with all the media, you know, with all these news things, the only one that I count on is you guys, and what would I do if you guys weren't there? I don't know what I'd do. Where would I get my news? And I would be dead in water. So I got to do my part.
Make sure you do your part, like Eric. Join the Truth Team. Get all the details by calling 1-800-347-5151 or visit online, pointofview.net/team. Support the truth and make a difference for the future. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. 800-347-5151. and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, your guest host for Point of View.
Welcome back to August 2nd, 2017, National Ice Cream Sandwich Day. Kerby, I'm joined at the round table by Kerby Anderson, Grant Skeldon, and Ryan Casey Waller. We have been talking about what is a man, Kerby, and we have got a caller coming in from Georgia. Jonathan, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Hey, Jonathan, what is your point of view?
Hey, I was listening to you guys talk about the what Christian worldview, what a man is. And I was reminded of a study that my dad led through a few years ago with Tony Evans. I believe he's a pastor out of Texas that went through a series called Kingdom Man. I'm not sure if y'all are aware of that.
I think Kerby is.
I would say so. We did an interview. Tony's a good friend. I speak at his church, and of course, he's been on this program many times before. The book is entitled Kingdom Man, Every Man's Destiny, Every Woman's Dream. But it's really talking about the need for us to assert our manhood in a biblical way. In some respects, it's a counterpoint to a secular book that was written years ago, which was talking about aggressive women, passive men. Because we just talked about that a minute ago. There's sort of this idea that we've taught inside the church that in order to be a Christian man, you have to be nice. There's never a time when you're assertive. There's never a time when you're defending your wife, your sister, your girlfriend, whatever it is. You're always supposed to be non-controversial. And as a result, we sort of taught inside the church that we're to be passive. And of course, anybody who knows Tony Evans knows that is not the case. And it is not only a book, but it's also, as I think Jonathan's pointing out, there is a video series and some great teaching. And I love one of the themes he says in the book. I'm going to clean it up a little bit, but he said that a kingdom man is the kind of man that when his feet hit the floor, the devil says, oh no, he's up. He actually uses different words, but the idea is that we are really making a difference for the kingdom as men.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. It's funny because when you read the Gospels too, Jesus is compassionate, but he's not always nice.
No.
I mean, he speaks the truth, right? And it's not always just flowery, interactions with people. And I've found that sometimes in the church, when you do take a defensive stance or an aggressive stance, perhaps you feel passionately about something, I found that oftentimes people feel as if you're all of a sudden behaving like in a threatening manner.
Yeah.
And it's because you're just not necessarily being nice, but there's, such a thing as righteous anger.
I saw Ryan's sermon just the other day, and you were talking about the number of times people ask Jesus questions, more than 30 times, and then you shock the audience by talking about how many times he really answered them.
Yeah,
and most of the time answered it by asking another question, right?
That's right. He didn't let people off easy. He was a challenging Socratic teacher,
Yeah.
I've always found that the person that asks the questions in the conversation is the one that has the power. And so, and more often than not, what you see with Jesus is he's not only asking questions, but he's also not willing, or he's also willing to give answers when necessary. I think, especially from a millennial standpoint, and Grant, I'd love to hear your point of view on this. I think millennials are increasingly open to questions, and they're very receptive to asking questions. And so they're always wanting to question everything. And I think this is really epitomized in a lot of what Rob Bell's books do. He's just very much a question answer. And I don't want to say that we should never be hesitant towards asking questions, but we also shouldn't be hesitant towards accepting answers that we continue to hear over and over and over again.
Yeah, totally. It's funny. There's this Babylon Bee article that came out about Stephen Furtick. It was joking about Stephen Furtick going to Lakewood, which is Joel Osteen's church, as if he was a free agent, and he's just signed a $30 million deal. And I saw yesterday Stephen Furtick came out with a video saying that is not true.
It's not true.
Because enough people actually
a lot of his friends even thought it was true, that he was like a bonus baby being hired into another church.
And he said, I'm just going to tell you what my mom's always told me. Check the source. Just always check the source.
That's great.
So making the scripture the source, one thing you said is the whole being nice. I, for at least the first 2 years of my Christian walk, thought being a Christian man means being nicer than before. And I honestly thought that was like holding the door open, because I just didn't do that before I was a Christian. And I know that sounds weird, but it was like just doing the things you see people do that are nice on movies. And I started doing those things, and I felt better about myself. But then they do feel, I was like, I don't think that's what I see in the Bible as much of what really changes the disciples. And one thing about Jesus being stern, humble, meek is, I have never seen a pastor preach on this ever. We know the Beatitudes and like, blessed are the meek, blessed are the poor in spirit, but I've never seen someone quote Matthew 11:6, where Jesus said, blessed is anyone who is not offended by me.
Wow.
Like that's a man that's probably not the nicest, when he's like, man, you're blessed if you can hear the hard truth that I say, which can be offensive sometimes, and you're blessed if you can take it to heart.
Yeah, that's so good.
Gets us back to those safe spaces we talk about here.
Oh my goodness,
I want to hear you millennials talk about that for a minute.
You don't want to get me started on safe spaces, and so
Trigger warnings.
Yeah, I'm increasingly fascinated by the millennial perspective. One of just kind of this idea of wanting. There's a desire to be nice. Love is love is love is love. Love wins. But there's also this component that we have to be able to speak the truth in love, I guess you could say. And you can't forsake one without the other, right? That they're kind of these conjoining twins that come with one another. And increasingly in our tolerant, intolerant age, it's just really hard to be able to speak that truth, but do so in a loving manner. I'm reminded of what Jesus would say, that blessed are the persecuted for righteousness' sake, right? It's one thing to be persecuted for righteousness' sake. It's another thing to be persecuted for being a jerk. Yeah, and more often than not, the truth is just a bludgeon sometimes that's offered.
The other question I have, and it's going to get into some of the other topics we have, is if we don't have a good role model, there are some concerns that I've had about that. If you don't have fathers, we're going to talk about the effect of fatherlessness, and we've talked with David Blankenhorn and others about this. You don't have that role model. If you look at the movies, you're trying to figure out, okay, some of them are sensitive and some of them are aggressive. Some of the action heroes don't say 3 words to anybody, and so I'm supposed to be that way. So then, I'll look at the church, but then I think the mistake, and you've been to seminary and some of us that have taught at seminary know that sometimes we educate our future seminary professors and pastors to not play favorites. So sometimes we see that the pastor doesn't have any friends because he doesn't really open up. He isn't very vulnerable. I think that sometimes men, especially in the millennial generation, are just saying, okay, tell me which model I can follow. I'm looking for a mentor. Where am I going to find those individuals?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, and Grant's the real expert here. I'll let him talk about it. Maybe we'll get into that with the father question, but sort of distinguishing between, mentoring, and discipling. But it's a fundamental issue. If you don't have someone that you can see that's further down the line than you, and ideally as this happens, boys hopefully have someone older to look to, ideally a father, but if not, at least an older brother, an uncle, or something. If there's not this direct contact to see in all the phases of life, then it becomes really difficult to know. And you're right. So if they show up at the church and they're looking to the pastor to be that, well, it is difficult because the pastor is only actually going to be able to show you certain sides,
right,
of his life. I found, and this is sort of tracking back to what you were saying just a moment ago, that you can speak the truth in love in a very effective way if and only if the people believe that you actually do love them.
Yeah, that's good.
Right? So it can't be just this, I'm going to say it in this way, or I'm going to say the hard thing, but just say, hey, but I'm speaking this in love. No. They have to actually interact with you on another level and know that you do love them. And if you actually can show that you love them with your actions, by making time for them, by showing up for them when they need you, by giving of yourself, then they will listen to the hard truths that you have to say. It's not about a nice voice. It's about them actually receiving your love.
It's good. For all the talk about millennials being thin-skinned, which I do think that they can be, definitely. The irony, at least in the church, is the people that are influencing millennial men, especially the most, are not soft, encouraging pastors. They call young people to very high callings, but it is truth and love. And it is out of I care for you too much to let you live where you currently are. And it reminds me of how the disciples mostly probably were what we would call millennials today, and that Jesus did the most, even me with, I feel like, pretty thick skin, or anyone with the thickest skin, if you're a believer and you ever heard Jesus come up to you and say, "Get behind me, Satan," that's Jesus, and he's never been wrong, and he's that harsh with you. And to think that Peter didn't leave him and say, "Man, I can't work for a guy that would call me Satan," He stuck it out, and I think the only reason that could happen is because he had invested so much love, so much care, so much time in Peter's life that he knew, man, I must really be off when I do that. And so I think it's not that young adults can't take cynicism. I think we've received a lot of coddling when we grew up, and we received now a lot of cynicism in the workplace, but we haven't received a lot of coaching, which is that truth and love.
That's so good. And I'm reminded of just this idea, kind of going back towards Jesus, and then kind of reminding ourselves that if you can speak the truth in love, just as long as you really do love them and want the best for them. I'm reminded that sometimes the hardest way and sometimes the easiest, most palatable way is for someone to know that I want you to experience the fullness of life. I want you to be able to know the conversation that I'm about to have, though it may be hard, it's moving you towards the fullness of life. And so when we come back, we're going to be talking about the fatherlessness in this particular generation. And so we hope you will join us right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Aiken, Illinois is a small town in the heartland of our country. There you will find the salt-of-the-earth folks growing the crops that feed the rest of us. Everyone knows everyone, so it was no surprise when the Clark's boy, Seth, was announced the salutatorian of his graduating grade school class. But when word got around that Seth was going to quote from the Bible in his speech, someone complained. That complaint reached the school board, and soon enough, Seth was told that the Constitution would not let his speech with religious content be delivered on school grounds to a captive graduation ceremony audience. Well, that was that, or so it seemed. The story has a bit of a surprise ending. A neighbor who lived across from the school offered up his front porch. So when it came time for Seth's speech, the audience turned around. There on the front porch of this iconic Midwestern town was Seth Clark, holding forth, giving the speech that he always wanted to give. Perhaps you live in one of those towns where folks still stop to chat on the front stoop on a cool summer's evening. If not, you need to know that the Constitution never requires a student's private remarks be given on private property. It was the proudest moment of my life, said Seth's mom. Well, I suppose it was. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we are back on Point of View. I am Nick Pitts. I'm joined at the round table by Mr. Kerby Anderson, Grant Skeldon, and Ryan Casey Waller. And we are transitioning now, moving away from what is it to be a man in today's culture to now talking about the fatherlessness, the loss of men in today's culture. And so new research come out, and we put this on our website. So if you want to go to pointofview.net website to be able to find this, new research shows how the loss of a father significantly affects children at even the DNA level, shortening the ends of their chromosomes. Kids who are raised without a dad have much shorter telomeres and the protective caps at the end of the chromosomes that are believed to affect health and longevity. And so just for context, what we understand is that right now there are children probably at around 41% of children that are entering into the world today in the U.S. are born into fatherless homes. And so, Kerby, as you think about those stats, as you look at that study, does this seem to be correct based upon your understanding and upon your position in the culture?
This is new because we certainly have talked in the past about fatherlessness, and David Blankenhorn's been on the program a couple of times, and I've written about this, and some of these men's books have gotten into it as well. And of course, the impact that this has first on the men, because the young boy really is trying to figure out what it means to be a man. And especially for young boys, they have to go through a woman's world to be a man. Most of their teachers in grade school are female. Most of their teachers, even sometimes in high school, are female. When they go to Sunday school class, most of their teachers there are female. And then if you grow up without a dad, it really is hard to figure that out. So that's the first issue. But it's also devastating for the women as well, because a woman oftentimes perceives herself through her father's eyes. And so that is going to have an impact. So again, all the social statistics for years have pointed out the difference between having a father in the home and not having a father in the home. You look at the number of individuals that are in penitentiaries. They will lots of times do things where you can send your mother a Mother's Day card, and those are outstandingly successful. Then they'll have one for Father's Day. There's hardly any response, as you kind of can guess. But this new study even says not only are there social impacts, but there are biological impacts, that the telomere at the end of your chromosome might be shortened. I mean, it just begins to illustrate how really the biblical idea of a father and a mother in the home cleaving together and having a child and raising that child in a godly home is the ideal. And all the other situations, we need to pray for those single moms out there raising their kids without a dad.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure that there is anyone out there that's got it tougher than a single parent, that's trying. It's just unbelievable the strain that they're put under. And I see this a lot, in the church, and you can just see it objectively that it's much better for everybody to have a mother and a father around. There's different gifts that are given, from fathers and mothers, and it's too much, for any one person to do on their own.
Grant, are you seeing kind of this fatherless effect, whether it's the biological component with just the health of millennials, or whether it's the kind of social component of growing up without a father? Do you see this playing out among millennials?
Yeah, totally. So I go to a very diverse church in West Dallas, Mercy Street. And I remember about 2 years ago being in a small group, and it was about 15, mostly guys. And we all told our story of, my question was, tell me about what it was like growing up with your parents. And this church has Hispanics, African Americans, white people, even like Africans from Africa. And so there was a guy from Nigeria there. And what was so crazy is we had all different stories. Some of us grew up in church, some of us didn't. Some of us had didn't grow up in church, but we lived pretty morally good lives, and then we became a Christian. But despite all the differences in our background, our country, our story, the one consistent thing we all kind of came up with was that we had never seen our dad cry before. And it really hit me. I was like, man, you're from another continent. You're all from different cultures, but all of our men that were our dads, like, they never publicly cried, even though we all said we knew they were going through difficult things. Whenever they needed to really break down, they would go behind closed doors. And it made me think about just how I think there are two types of fatherlessness. There is fatherlessness when the dad left when he was young. And so in some ways, when I was 6, my dad left me. But then there's a lot of, and I see this more in suburban culture, where it's not that the dad left once, it's that the dad leaves every night. When he shows up, he doesn't emotionally and spiritually pursue the heart of their kid. And so I'm not saying one's harder than the other, but one is difficult when you see him physically, but not emotionally present.
It's so good. I mean, if there's one thing I could say to any fathers who are listening, if you are there, right? So if you haven't left, right, and you are there, there is nothing you can give that's more valuable to either your spouse or your children than your presence. By actively being, when you're home, be home. And it sounds like the most simple thing in the world, but it's not. Children pick up on the fact that you're in the room, but you're not really present, and you're not providing attention to them, that you're not truly interested in their lives.
So I want to throw this out there because there's certain things that I realize. I'm 27 now, and I think, man, I wish I would have done this a long time ago. So I think any dad that maybe hears that, and I've seen this, I've said this to dads, and I want to change. But when you've done a habit, and your kid's like 15, 20 years old, and all they know is a certain habit and routine that you've lived whenever you come home, how do you change that? I know why it's hard to share the gospel with your family is they know that this is what I'm usually like, and now I've got to try to change. And so what would you guys recommend? How do you jostle that and change?
I think they have to be able to be authentic, like you're saying. So instead of I'm going to go cry behind the door, to be honest and say, look, kiddos, I haven't gotten this entirely right. We haven't done this. I want to do this, and just actually be vulnerable and be honest that you're trying to make a change, and not pretend maybe you've always been this way. But it's a very scary thing because, again, men, we're supposed to always know the answers and have already been doing it right. So it's very, very difficult, especially, I can tell you, as a father, to say, I got this wrong.
I was thinking that most of the time we criticize television because it shows the wrong model, but this is one time where it maybe shows the right model, because I've seen a lot of these situation comedies, not that I watch a lot, but I'll walk by and see one on there or have people showing me clips in where the fathers actually do admit that they aren't successful. You mentioned Tool Time, you couldn't really ever expect him to say, I've always got it right, because he was always messing up, right? And also in terms of being able to see people still interacting with one another, I think the biggest problem a lot of fathers have is that now they're as addicted to those smartphones as the millennials that they're raising are. They're addicted to turning on the TV set and watching Sports Center and not interacting with their kids. And you really don't see that on television. So this is one of the very few times where television maybe shows us a better model than sometimes what we see in reality.
Yeah, so I'd love to hear your press back on this, Ryan, or maybe even Grant, too. Like, it's just the idea that technology is probably one of the primary things that's robbing us of our idea of being able to be present in the moment, right? That the average millennial is going to look at their phone 120 times. They're going to send and receive 128 text messages a day. 32 minutes, it was just reported today, on Instagram they're going to spend. Is it really technology robbing us of the ability to be present?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's sad, and I'll admit this, that when I'm looking at my phone, my 4-year-old will often come up to me and say, "Oh, Daddy, are you writing a message to Thomas? Thomas is my boss." Like, he knows that I'm on this phone all the time, and something I do a lot is write messages to Thomas. And so, he wants to know. And absolutely, I fall into this trap where I come home and I still have the phone, and instead of putting it up and actively making a decision in that moment to end the work day and be present with my family, I don't. And so I keep it, and I'm still under this mindset, too, of like, well, the most important thing I do is to make sure that these bills are paid so everybody can be provided for. And so thus I need to answer these emails and do this thing. And it's just a lie that we're living into. And it's robbing us of not only our personal joy, but of our ability to be present.
And coming back right after the break, after the hour break, we'll be continuing to talk about millennials and millennial misconceptions, and then what are some of the root of those millennial misconceptions. And we'll be right back after this break.
There are those who listen to Point of View while they're driving, and some can listen at home or at work. But here's the question: where do you go where you cannot listen to Point of View? Well, if you have the app, the free Point of View radio app, the answer is just about nowhere. This is an on-the-go world, and now wherever you go, Point of View goes with you. Visit the Apple or Google Play Store and download the free Point of View app. You can listen and watch the program live or play it again later. Get Kerby's Viewpoints commentary. Click the Take Action link. Learn about important issues and make a difference in this world. You can also read articles, find a local radio station, easily contact us with your comments or questions. Don't leave home or the office or anywhere else without Point of View. Again, visit the Apple or Google Play Store today and get the app, the free Point of View radio app. Oh, and one more thing, if you like it, click that little button that says Donate Now and join the team. Point of View and the Point of View app, with you on the go. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track, and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, your guest host for Point of View.
Welcome back to Point of View for the second hour. This is Nick Pitts from the Denison Forum leading the ship. And Kerby, I don't know why you gave up the seat. I don't understand.
I think I've done very well here. And we need to mention the Denison Forum before we're done.
Yeah.
And go around and talk about the initiative as well as some of the other things. So we'll get into all of this today.
Yeah,
this
so
hour.
We've got Kerby Anderson at the round table, but also Grant Skeldon of Initiative. How are you, Grant?
What's up, guys?
So good to have Grant here, as well as Ryan Casey Waller, writer, author extraordinaire.
Book coming out soon.
Book is coming out soon.
A month from now.
A month from now, September 4th.
Cannot wait. Can't wait to get a hold of that. And so I thought we'd ease back into it, fellas, okay? And so we've got, it's National Ice Cream Sandwich Day, okay? I've been thinking about this all morning since I wrote today's briefing. I don't know if, I've got a sweet tooth. As a matter of fact, I've got sweet teeth, I guess you could say. And so I'm interested in, what is your favorite ice cream sandwich combination? Because you know there's these places like Sweet Sammy's now, et cetera, that you can really customize. So what are we thinking right now, fellas? Are we peanut butter cookie people? Are we birthday cake? Are we what are we thinking?
Oh man, I'm so plain Jane.
Oh, wow.
I just like the classic, the vanilla and the chocolate, just the old school. So we buy for the boys. Love it.
Okay, Grant, what are you thinking?
Creatively, I would think if BJ's made a Pizookie mixed to make some type of ice cream sandwich.
Ooh,
that's
I love
what I
that
would
Pizookie
want.
idea there.
Yeah.
I just had one the other day that was a churro Pizookie. Didn't even know they made such a thing.
Wow.
Isn't that the craziest thing? People around the country might not even know what BJ's are, but that's one of the restaurants. But again, Neapolitan. How about a Neapolitan, ice cream sandwich?
Okay, so I'm from Tennessee, listeners. I'm from Clarksville, Tennessee. Went to Austin Peay State University, where we chanted "Let's Go Pee," and it was not socially inappropriate, like it is right now to some people that are around the round table. And one of the places, the iconic restaurants in Clarksville, Tennessee, was a place called Johnny's Big Burger. And at Johnny's, they had this delectable reminder of God's goodness and grace known as the bun and cream. And so what they would do with the bun and cream is they would just take this honey bun out of wrapping, probably something that they just got at the local 7-Eleven. I don't know. They would put it on the grill. They would grill it up on both sides to give it that crisp and that caramelized sugar, and then they would put a scoop of vanilla ice cream on there. And it like automatically reminded you that this is the day that the Lord has made, and we will rejoice aboundingly. But it was so good. Well, speaking of ice cream and speaking of goodness, fathers, right? We've been talking.
You got transition nice.
Well done.
We've been talking about the good gift that are children, and then how our Father in heaven has called us to emulate that and be good fathers to our children. And we've been talking about the fatherless epidemic that's kind of plaguing right now the U.S. landscape. And we were talking about in the previous hour that right now, just to give you a scope and scale perspective, about 41 to 45%, kind of statistics vary, as children coming into the world in single parent households. And then a new study that came out that article is actually on our website, pointofview.net, about the effect of fatherlessness. We've always known about the societal effects, but we haven't. What this article is pointing to is there's biological effects now, that fatherlessness could very well, according to the research, could affect you both physically as well as cognitively as well. And so, Grant, we were talking earlier about how it's so important for a father to be present in that moment. Is it? And we talked a little bit about technology. Help us, remind us about how technology sometimes can keep us from being fully present.
I do think that, I think we mentioned that all generations are addicted to cell phones, TV, all that kind of stuff. I do think, I actually just started doing, you know, that Simon Sinek video where he talks about like, don't go to bed with your phone.
Yeah.
And we talked about not doing it. I've been doing it. I bought an $8 alarm. And even this morning I woke up and thought, it is so helpful to not have a phone right now, because then I'm starting to form a routine where I read the Bible and then I read some type of devotional. I'm reading Mark Batterson's Charles Circle. And so that's huge. When it comes to the father, just even what I think, because I thought you might ask me, what do you think a father does? And I've started to think, well, what does our Father do with us? And I think at the core of it is just going after our heart is really what I would assume. Now, I was wave a white flag and say, I'm not a father. I'm not even a husband. But I just think I got the Bible to look at as a reference point. And when I look at God, he doesn't seem as concerned with our actions as he is with our heart. Because sometimes I feel like I've done the right actions, but not with the right heart. And he always challenges my heart, and he's never let my heart go. And so when I think what I would want from a father, what kind of father I'd want to be a father that goes after my child's heart.
I love that so much. Romans chapter 8, Paul calls God the searcher of hearts. And there's something that's really important there, because we all know our hearts in ways that nobody else knows. Only God knows, right? And so for most of us, we keep certain things hidden from one another because we operate under this belief that if someone actually knew the totality of my heart, they would reject me. They would not love me. And what we know is that God is the searcher of hearts. He sees our hearts. We're laid bare before him, and he loves us anyway. What children need to know and what children need to have is a father who does the same thing, who pursues them in their totality, and then they get to know, with all my flaws, right, with all my sin, with all my stuff, this guy loves me and is committed to me. And that, I think, is fundamentally what goes wrong when the father is not present. They're not sent out on their way into the world already knowing that they're really loved for who they are in total.
You know, I have a counselor that I'm on a board with, and he says that one of the things he does from time to time is he'll have someone sit there, and then he'll put an empty chair there and say, now, if Jesus were sitting in that chair right now, what would he say about you? And to a person, they say, well, I think he'd be very disappointed in me, or they would be very discouraged about my Christian life, or whatever it might be. And then he, of course, pursues a little bit, and usually what it is if I put your father there, what would he say? The same words. In other words, oftentimes our projection of who God is influenced by our earthly father. And, of course, you've seen some of the studies. I remember Paul Vitz came out with a book, Fatherlessness, in which he found that almost all the atheists, if you look at their biographies or autobiographies, almost to a person, they either had an absent father or a very demanding, difficult, defective father. And, of course, if you don't have a good relationship with your earthly father, you certainly don't have a good relationship oftentimes with your heavenly father, or you have to overcome it. And so back to what Ryan is saying, if we can model for our children the same kind of compassionate, agape love to our kids, what an incredible gift that would be for them for their lifetime, and also how that would really begin to supercharge them in terms of their spiritual growth.
I think that's really important. I think that's good. Look, especially what Kerby said, and then building back upon what Ryan said, especially in a divorce culture. Because implicit within a divorce culture is this understanding the child really is sitting front row to the best love that they know. And when divorce happens, there is, within a child's mind, there is the potential, the propensity to be able to say, there is something the mother or the father saw that they no longer loved, which caused the divorce to happen. And so it's increasingly important just to be able to seek after one another and to be that father that continues to pour after it. And so we're going to continue on with this conversation about fatherlessness in the next hour. But if you have a question or comment that you'd like to add, you can call in at 800-351-1212, 800-351-1212. And when we come back, we'll continue on this fatherless movement and in the divorce culture. We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, the Trump administration has been rolling back federal regulations at a significant rate. One report estimates that deregulation has removed more than 800 regulations. This would include 469 planned regulatory actions that were part of the Obama administration's regulatory agenda, and another 391 active regulatory proceedings that were actually reclassified as long-term or inactive. Now, you may remember that Donald Trump signed an executive order calling for a regulatory freeze. He also signed an executive order that required an agency to identify 2 federal rules to eliminate for every 1 regulation proposed. It turns out that the administration has done much more than this. The 1 in, 2 out order was a nice goal, but bureaucrats have exceeded that goal by eliminating 16 old rules for every new one introduced. Wayne Cruz remarked, "No one is surprised that the Trump administration would issue considerably fewer regulations than the Obama administration, but what is a surprise is that the president is the least regulatory president since Ronald Reagan." OMB Director Mick Mulvaney told reporters, "I cannot express to you enough how much things have changed when it comes to the regulatory burden, the attitudes towards the regulations in this country, and you're going to see more of that in the next 8 years." Of course, there is opposition, especially in the courts. The D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals ruled the other day that Scott Pruitt and the EPA could not postpone an Obama administrative rule concerning methane emission. Wall Street Journal editors warned that we should look for a deluge of such lawsuits as progressives resort to the courts to compensate for their defeat in 2016. And this latest decision highlights the stakes in future judicial nominations. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we are back on Point of View, and I am Nick Pitts. I'm joined by Kerby Anderson, Grant Skeldon, and Ryan Casey Waller. And we're going to go ahead and take a phone call from Michael in Texas. Michael, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Hey, Michael, how are you?
Doing great. Thanks for taking my call. It's my second time on the air. Thank you.
Hey.
What I was thinking about was a bit of a painful issue for me. It's not. I had my dad growing up, but greatly he was more and more emotionally available, or just seemed very not there when it came to supporting my dreams from music to video games making and the whole kit caboodle. And largely what I did not get was that support or that encouragement or him investing and say, "Hey, Michael, what are you interested? What are you up to? Just, hey, let's hang out." And then for the last 17 years, I've barely had any communication with my dad whatsoever. And in that absence, just like many other men and, of course, other girls, too, have felt is that, I don't have a male figure to encourage me, to help guide me on these simple things, or just give me a model of somebody of what does it look like to be a man. For girls, it'd be like, well, what kind of man do I look up to when it comes to, finding someone to marry, or what girls need from a father. So what I was thinking about was just how important it is that men, older men especially, step in, not just for children, but for the younger men, and say, "Hey, guys, let's just hang out. Let's make it a regular thing." And it's not enough just to simply come alongside with the moment for a brief moment, but regularly say, "I'm going to make time for you and invest in you." And I don't see that happening a whole lot on a large scale within the church, especially of men saying, "Younger men, if you're lacking, I will fill that space in for you."
Hey, Michael, thank you so much. Grant, you've done a lot of work on this, right?
Yeah. So, Michael, actually, when you talk, I just feel like I'm in the car with you, man. I'm the same story. I have a dad that provided a lot, but he was kind of distant emotionally or spiritually. And I used to hold it against him so much. And this actually just happened about 2 or 3 years ago, where I feel like I started thinking about what was my dad's dad like and what was his dad's dad like and what were they going through. And me and Ryan actually are working on a book right now where we feel like a lot of our grandparents, they came out of kind of the Great Depression and war, and they made decisions off of life based off provision and just providing a better life. And so getting a good job, going to a good college just to get stability. And while I think our parents' generation made decisions not just by provision, but also by passion in their life, but not as much because they were parented by a provision mindset. And I think our generation is not just about provision or about passion, but about purpose. And so when you talk about your dreams and pursuing that, I think that our parents have a hard time, though, connecting with that mindset when we don't want to go to a certain college to become a lawyer, a doctor, or something like that, but we want to make video games and or be a musician. And so I say all that to say is I realize my dad is focusing so much on provision, because I would assume your dad probably asked you a lot about your work, how much you get paid, what kind of college you're going to go to, schoolwork. Because my dad would always ask me about things pertaining about money. And I used to think, man, does he just not care about my passions or my purpose? And I even told him it was a year went by, and I said, Dad, every time you call me, I've been in college, but every time you call me, you always bring up my bank account or making more money or getting a little bit more hours and stuff like that. And you never ask me about my passion or my purpose and the things I want to do. And I realized is because that's what he considers love, is providing a better life, because that's what his dad did for him. And so I don't think it's that he doesn't care now. I think it's that we have to shift what it means to be fully a Christian. And so one way that may look like is finding mentors or someone to disciple you, because that has been huge for me. And what I would say is discipleship isn't just finding someone you can meet with. It would be finding someone you can follow and they can include you in their schedule, because maybe God has opened the door for other men to kind of fill that role when it comes to purpose and passion in your life.
Yeah, Grant makes a great point about seeking it out. So this has been, the relationship that you have with your father, and we can't choose our fathers, but I have always been shocked by how whenever I would meet somebody that I thought could be either a good person to disciple me or to mentor me, just asking them, right, and making the initiative to do it. I mean, I don't think anyone's ever rejected me. I mean, folks, if you're persistent and you look for it and you go for it and you look to somebody and say, man, I think that you have a lot you could offer to me. Could we meet? I mean, I've always been really surprised by the generosity of men who are willing to do this. So part of it's that you just got to take the onus upon yourself and go look for it. And I think you'll be really, really pleased by how gracious people really are with their time.
Grant brought up something about having other men in the church be involved, and I'll use a couple of examples. You may have a son that maybe is really interested in car repair, and you don't even know what a torque wrench is, but maybe you can find somebody in the church that knows how to do that. And this is something that I did a number of years ago because I had a son that really liked basketball. Well, fortunately, I played basketball, so I got him and all these other kids that liked basketball, and we went to shooting hoops and hoop it up and all those kinds of things. But then I had a relationship with some other kids that really liked computers. Well, I put myself through graduate school programming in computers, so we went to the Infomart and to computer shows and things like that. And the point I'm making is that there was a book came out a number of years ago by Hillary Clinton titled, It Takes a Village to Raise a Child. Well, what she was trying to do is push socialism. But there is some truth in that it really does take a church to raise a child. And there are other men in the church. And I would say right now, not only to actually encourage these young millennials to go find a mentor, but for some of these single moms to go to one of the men in the church and say, can you help my son? Because, I really don't know how to fly fish, but he really seems interested in this. I'm not really going to go backpacking, but maybe you could take him backpacking. I don't have a clue how to even change the oil on my car, but he's really interested in cars. And I think, Ryan, that's something that the church really needs to foster and encourage, where other men can step forward and also help disciple some of these younger boys.
I do too. And there's freedom in this when we recognize that we don't have to be all things to all people, even our own children, that if we could foster communities of Christians in which we honestly look to one another and knew that we would give of ourselves as resources to each other and our children. I mean, imagine what that could do. Imagine what those kind of communities look like when we're genuinely interested in helping one another raise our kids. That's the real deal.
So I got a question. Kerby, what is a torque wrench?
Yeah, no idea.
No, but I think you all are bringing up great points, and I want to poke Grant on this to help kind of fill this out for a little bit, because there's 4 times in the biblical narrative that we hear that we are supposed to, the righteous will live by faith, right? That we hear it all the way back in Habakkuk. We hear it in Romans. We're going to hear it in Ephesians. Like, the righteous are living by faith. And I think you brought up a really great point in that it's not necessarily a class that discipleship is, but rather it's an invitation into everyday life. What does it look like for the Christian to be able to be invited, the young Christian to be invited into the family, the dinner table? Spell that out for us a little bit more.
Yeah, so I think that my whole philosophy is what the church is thinking they're discipling, and really they're just mentoring at best. And what I would say is that mentorship is you say, come and meet with me. So you set a time and a place once a week, once a month, once a quarter, and that's mentorship. But you don't know what kind of father a man is, or what kind of husband he is, or what kind of even worker he is, what kind of ethics he has, if all you do is see him at Starbucks at a table. It can be a counseling session. It can be talking about their life or their addictions, or even getting into the Word, and that's good, but that's still just come and meet with me. I think God, that is a great thing, but the Great Commission is not just come and meet with me, it's come and follow me. And so I would say discipleship is when you can follow someone into, I like to think of 4 sectors: their personal life, their church life, their work life, and their family life. And so if you can go and see a man as a father and as a husband, that was huge. As a 16-year-old, that was huge for me to see in a man named Kevin Batista, to see how he was as a father and husband. I saw a guy that was not giving leftover energy to his family when he got home. That was huge. And almost that he would say that was my first ministry, my first calling. And he was like, I'm coming from work, which is my second calling, but my family actually comes first. So even though I'm tired, I'm gonna amp up my energy or make sure I save energy. He never said, and you should do this too. But if discipleship is caught more than it's taught, I just said I want to be like that man when I grow up. And I think a lot of young adults are not receiving those kind of discipleship moments. And at best, we're getting moments whenever that church says, like, hey, turn to your neighbor and say hello, as if that's real, like, community. We need moments in which we bring generations together for discipleship moments.
Yeah, I think one of the things about generations being brought together is something I just cannot highly recommend enough. Ben Sass's book, The Vanishing American Adult. And one of the things that he really argues for is this idea of being intergenerational. We've become so segmented within our age populations that there really is wisdom when older men and younger men are coming together, younger women and older women are coming together, and we're seeing the richness of life of individuals that have come this far and are saying, you can do it as well. When we come back, we're going to continue on this conversation as well as explore misconceptions of millennials. Join us back after this.
Sarita is a Point of View listener in Georgia, someone probably a lot like you. Listening to your program, she writes, has helped me realize that I do have the power to conduct change in my area and this nation. And with all of the online tools you provide, this power has become even more apparent to me. What can one person do? A whole lot, says Sarita. And then she says, and together we can get even more done. She's right. Sarita is right. This is a moment of opportunity, and together with you, Point of View is looking to accomplish a lot. This program and those online tools she mentioned will only continue being available if we hear from people like you this week. Join Truth Team 360. There are many levels. Check them out. Choose the size of the part you can play at pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. 800-347-5151.
Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, your guest host for Point of View.
We are back, and I am Nick Pitts. I'm joined at the Round Table on August 2nd, 2017, National Ice Cream Sandwich Day by Kerby Anderson, Grant Skeldon, and Ryan Casey-Waller. I'm going to get everything at a National Ice Cream Sandwich Day. I just want you guys to know that.
Everybody's going to send it to you, except it'll be melted by the time it arrives.
One can only hope.
Everything you can.
One can only hope. So listeners out there, I don't know if you can tell, but I am an Uber-riding, selfie-taking, Snapchatting millennial. And so apparently there are some misconceptions of millennials. In a shocking twist, I showed up on time, which I think would be one of the conceptions about millennials. We're commitment forsaking. But I haven't sent a Snapchat yet. I haven't sent one Snapchat. I've only looked at social media once while I've been here. So even statistics that came out today, Instagram said that the average American will look at Instagram for 32 minutes every day. And
I believe that.
The average millennial will read 9 minutes a day. Yeah, can we just celebrate that for a second? 9 minutes a day.
9 minutes a post?
9 minutes a day. They will read 9 minutes a day, millennials.
Philip Yancey, call your office, right?
Exactly. And so we kind of wanted, one of the things that I'm really interested in, I know Grant's really done a lot of work on this, is trying to inform the populace about millennials. So Grant, tell us a little bit about millennials and tell us about what are some of the misconceptions of millennials. I don't even know where you begin.
Where do you begin about millennials?
Where do you begin? Yeah.
Tell me about me.
Yeah, I know. Is it fun? The funny thing is, I have a car, but I did Uber here, and I have Snapchatted once. I Instagram storied at least. Millennials, man, pick one of. I mean, I'll give you a list of things: non-committal, entitled, slacktivist. Actually, I'm gonna talk about this one. I heard about this recently. That most millennials are OCD.
Okay.
They have obsessive comparison disorder.
Oh, yeah.
So I think that that is such a big piece that's changing the way millennials think and decide their major, go to college, pick their job. When you are looking at people online all the time that are doing way more awesome things than you, and you're at a job that's not fun and you're not making an impact, I think it's leading to the 14 different jobs by the time we're 40, which is the trajectory millennials are on right now, according to Barna. And so I think realizing, and for our parents and our grandparents to realize, we all compare, all generations do. It's just the limit has burst open for millennials because we can compare so much more than our parents could compare. Back in the day, you can compare. Keeping up with the Jones was keeping up with their yard, their home, their new car. You saw the exterior of their home, maybe got invited inside to see they have better furniture and all that. But you don't get to see their vacation home. You don't get to see their workplace, the view they have in their office. You don't get to see the food they ate every morning, lunch, and dinner. And now for our generations, when you then add a mantra of showing the best and hiding the rest, you are comparing just all the time to a false reality, which can then make you make decisions like, man, I'm not doing what all my friends seem to be doing, so I'm going to leave and start over. And so we tend to climb ladders, just a small amount, and then switch the ladder, small amount, small amount, small amount. We never get to see what happens when you have long obedience in the same direction.
I see Eugene Peterson. That was great. My dad gave up on the idea of trying to keep up with the Joneses with his yard because he started employing my brother and I to mow the yard. and
that didn't work so well.
Yeah, it was a quantity of time over quality of yard. And so I just have this vivid reminder on the John Deere because we sat on about an acre lot. And so I just was going up and down, up and down. And, you know, in a lawnmower, when you're moving up and down, the mower, the blade isn't necessarily cutting the grass, and so it looks like you got cut by a blind barber. And so we kind of gave up on that idea. But look, continue on, Ryan. Help us understand. Are you seeing kind of this FOMO, fear of missing out, this idea of comparison within millennials that you're working with?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, to me, the point that Grant's making is so huge. It used to be that I would compare myself to the folks that I, came into contact with, right? And all of human beings do that. The problem with the internet, and particularly with social media, is that it's just endless, right? So you can go down the rabbit hole continually about whatever it is that someone else is doing better or more extravagantly than you, sort of all levels of life. I see it a lot right now with sort of like, I guess the oldest millennials, which is my group, a lot of us that are in the phase of having young families. I'm seeing this jump up, particularly my wife's experienced it, and a lot of her friends talk about this obsessive comparison between basically the job that you're doing as a parent. So, and you see this a lot with women. They're all Instagramming, and they Instagram all the stuff when the kids are like being perfect and the kitchen looks spotless and they're having just so much fun and there's no tantrums or whatever. And constantly all these other young mothers are like seeing this and they're looking at it too, and they're just feeling terrible about themselves, thinking, well, this is not the case here, right? And in my house, it's like chaos. And it's just further projecting this, just, you don't have it together. And it never stops. And for whatever reason, we all know that people are only projecting certain moments. It's like we know that that's true, but it doesn't take away the sting at all. It still leaves you feeling just completely inadequate. And it's a vicious cycle. And I really don't know how it stops, but I do think that it's going to have to stop.
I'm always reminded of Seth Godin's quote where he says that comparison is the thief of joy. And how social media just provides us this living and moving comparison for everything, as to the meals that we eat, to the cars that we drive, to the vacations that we take, to the jobs that we're in. Kerby, do you see this just as someone that's looking on at millennials? Do you see this happening in your circumstances?
Well, I was going to add one more element, and that is just the social, cultural expectations that are happening. Right now we have mostly men around the table. We'll bring Chelsea back next week, and so she could probably speak to this as well. But what later was called the mommy wars, because you have a situation where if the woman stays at home and is a mother and raises the kids, there's always this, well, you need to be out there in the workday world. If she's out there in the workday world, then there's all the social things from her cultural context, maybe church and others, that you need to be home. And so if you think the men in the millennial generation are facing this, just think of what the women are facing right now, because it's darned if you do and darned if you don't. I mean, there is just this conflict of all sorts of different ideas and expectations and norms. And as we just pointed out with Grant, it's just been intensified because now you have the media, especially the internet and social media, just doing all it can to even make those feelings of guilt and of stress even more intense.
Yeah, that's right. It's not enough just to be a mother. What you need to be is a mother, a worker, and you also need to somehow have a blog that's got like 5 million people that follow it, and it's it's just crazy. In a nonprofit, yeah. It's insane. People just can't be people. It's like I feel like social media is robbing us not only of like joy, but just of finding the sacred in the ordinary, just ordinary.
Yeah, I think technology, here's my premise, that technology is the original temptation, right? So that you will be like God. Because what technology does is it says that you can know everything, you can be everywhere, and you have the power to create. And so I think it's just a modern day manifestation of the original temptation. Grant, as you're thinking through, as you're talking to millennials, as you're living and moving amongst millennials, how do you keep them from experiencing some of that robbing of joy that comes from social media? Because it's more than just simply abstaining from it. There's got to be some balance, right?
Man, I think I love you said this. I don't think it was online when you said the guy who Plutarch talked about these great biographies. So that what was the line that you said about biographies?
So Plutarch, who's a first century kind of biographer, and he said that he would write these biographies of these great individuals, and because he believed that biographies had the ability to be able to tap into our deep desires and inspire us to do great things.
Great. I was blessed when I was like 19 to come across guys like Charles Spurgeon, Martin Luther, George Mueller, C.T. Studd. These guys are heroes to me. They are my scorecard. They are what I want to look like. And so while I think many Christian leaders today are trying to be like XYZ pastor who speaks at every conference, while that is maybe a byproduct of doing great ministry, I try to just say, like, man, what does it look like to just be faithful today? And that, it might sound so simple. And then the biographies I like to look at is David and Joseph, because it's stories of two young guys that had a huge calling. And you're talking about an activist generation that wants to make a huge impact. You're anointed as king and you're a young guy. Or Joseph, you're going to change this entire generation. Even your parents and your brothers will bow down to you. But the one little caveat he tended to left out was, and it's not going to happen tomorrow. It's going to be like
so true,
so far down the road, and there's going to be a whole process to refine you to get you to the area and the place in which you can effectively do that. And so just helping remind young people that you can't have the progress without the process. And there even was a season of invisibility that Jesus had that is sacred, because the moment you are known, you have a standard that you could try to fake and live up to. So yeah, I think it's even why Jesus sometimes was like, shh, don't tell anyone I did this, because his time wasn't ready yet.
That's good. So that's really good. So when we come back, we're going to continue on this millennial misconceptions into our last 15 minutes, and we will be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Aiken, Illinois is a small town in the heartland of our country. There you will find the salt of the earth folks growing the crops that feed the rest of us. Everyone knows everyone, so it was no surprise when the Clark's boy, Seth, was announced the salutatorian of his graduating grade school class. But when word got around that Seth was going to quote from the Bible in his speech, someone complained. That complaint reached the school board, and soon enough, Seth was told that the Constitution would not let his speech with religious content be delivered on school grounds to a captive graduation ceremony audience. Well, that was that, or so it seemed. The story has a bit of a surprise ending. A neighbor who lived across from the school offered up his front porch. So when it came time for Seth's speech, the audience turned around. There on the front porch of this iconic Midwestern town was Seth Clark, holding forth, giving the speech that he always wanted to give. Perhaps you live in one of those towns where folks still stop to chat on the front stoop on a cool summer's evening. If not, you need to know that the Constitution never requires a student's private remarks be given on private property. It was the proudest moment of my life, said Seth's mom. Well, I suppose it was. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we are back for the last 9 minutes and 5 seconds.
Got it down.
Should I continue to remind them one more time, Kirby, that it's National
Ice Cream Sandwich Day? Yes, we should.
It's happening.
We're all going out and get ice cream sandwiches right after,
Sweet
right?
Sammy's. I cannot wait. Cannot wait.
We're going to find out he has a sponsorship of some sort.
Yeah, that's what I just thought of that.
You give me the seat, and now I'm taking a little on the side.
So I send out this thing called the Daily Briefing for the Denison Forum every morning.
I got it in front of me.
And so what we try to do is we try to, one, try to highlight articles that are driving the day that people will be talking about, and two, articles that reveal the spirit of the day. And I put nick notes in there that hopefully provide biblical insight to help you understand the particular articles. And it was funny because someone asked me about it the other day, because I don't know if you guys can tell or not, but I've been working out at a boxing gym. And so I know you can't tell because the muscles aren't there. I'm not the muscles from Brussels. Clarksville. But I mentioned that I was going to this boxing club, and I put it in the daily briefing twice, and someone responded back to me and was like, are you trying to sponsor them right now? And I was like, if you looked at me, you would realize I'm not being. I don't think they want to put me as their prototype of what happens when you go to their boxing club. As a matter of fact, I'm just like lamenting. But nevertheless, hey, I'm a millennial that's working out, which is
I praise.
I committed to it. So we were talking about millennial misconceptions right before the break, and Grant just threw his hands up in the air as I did, because there's just so much out there relative to the misconceptions of millennials. So Grant, help us. Is there something else that there's just this misconception about millennials, or just maybe something that the audience needs to know about millennials?
I'll talk about entitlement, which I think can be true. Yeah. But I do think we grew up in a culture of entitlement a little bit, in the sense of, let's just get this clear. The whole the participation trophy, I just think is, as we are millennials, when I hear that, I'm like, how are we getting made fun of for participation trophies when we were like 6 years old playing soccer and we were given these trophies like it was our
generation,
and we came up with a committee.
Right.
And I actually recently just put out a video talking about a dad said his kid got 9th place in a track race, and he bought the biggest trophy. He bought his own trophy that he said the school's never seen one this big, gave it to his kid and said, you won. And he said, what kind of, you're telling us we shouldn't do it. And he said, why? And my reason why, participation trophy is just a symbol of probably a posture towards all of parenting, in my opinion. And I do think it's because grandparents were a little harder. They had it harder. And so the Xers were like, man, I want to kind of love my kid a little bit more, but they loved us a little too much. And so what they can do is save us from some of the most difficult but necessary times in our life. Because when I think to myself, when are times in which I just needed to trust the Lord or wake up to the real responsibilities in life that I can't rely on my parents anymore? Those are the times in which I met the Lord and had intimacy with the Lord. And although I don't want to go back to it, there's times when I kind of do want that intimacy again. And so my line that I use is, when parents have that participation trophy or entitlement, or just even saving us from tough time kind of parenting mentality, what we could be doing is we're saving our kids from the Savior, because they don't get to have those times where it's like, although I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will not fear, for he is with me. They'll be like, because I never have to walk through this because my parents saved me. So we're saving kids from the Savior when we parent like that.
That's so true. Like one is an individual that was the recipient of many participation trophies because I lacked a particular quality known as athleticism and talent. But I also know that my parents were willing to, one, love me, but also willing to develop and instill that type of grit inside of me.
Good.
Angela Ducksworth has this book out called Grit, and she says that grit is about working on something you care about so much that you're willing to stay loyal to it. And it's in doing what you love, but not just falling in love, but staying in love with it. That perseverance that's just developed, inculcated within us. Is that something that you think is lacking within millennials, that grit, because of the participation trophies? Or what would you speak to about that?
Yeah, I read that book recently too, and a lot of what she's getting after is this: how do you stick with something for a really, really long time? And yeah, it's clearly missing in millennials in terms of the workplace. Like you said, Barna, what reports are going to have 14 different jobs by the age of 40.
Yeah.
There's a sense in which the culture is a little bit different than it was perhaps from our grandfathers who worked at the same company for 30 years. That's and then had a very, very good pension and all that. Some of that's changed, but 14's a bit excessive.
I've got some work to do. I'm out of here.
Yeah. I mean, what you miss when you don't stick with something, for a long time, is the opportunity for the ups and the downs. And as you say, in the downs, that's typically where we learn, right, the most. And what I think, at least from the millennials who are parenting right now, what I would say is you need to let your kid fail, because this is the best place for them to fail initially, because they can fail in this environment in which there are going to be consequences for failing, but you're there to love them, to steer them, to process through it, because they're gonna fail once they get outside this is all we do, right? Is basically mostly fail in life and have a couple of successes if you're lucky, right? That's probably like the average human experience. And so it's what you do with those failures. It's mostly going to determine the quality of your life. And so we've got to let them fail in a loving environment so they're prepared.
I was just thinking of Erwin Lutzer's book, Failure, the Backdoor to Success, and that book has never been a bestseller, but it's been a perennial seller because people oftentimes recognize how failure actually helps you develop certain characteristics and certain abilities, and it's back to that idea of grit and perseverance, and it seems to me that that's something that we are missing. But again, if you look at the biblical narratives, look at the kind of perseverance of Job, the perseverance of Jacob, go on.
Yeah, I was that was the one I was thinking about because that's the one that most sticks out in my head. It's probably one of my favorite biblical stories. I mean, you see this picture in Genesis 29 that he goes to Laban, and when he goes to Laban, he's willing to work 7 years for Rachel. At the end of 7 years of arduous work, he receives Leah. And what does he do? He wants Rachel so much, he's willing to work for another 7 years. And then my favorite verse is Genesis 29:20, and he worked those 7 years, and they seemed as nothing because of his love for her, of what was developed inside of him because of that love and that grit that he was willing to put forward. And so we're coming up to the close, and so I want to kind of highlight, some of these things that are coming out that both Ryan and Grant are doing, and want to give a chance to get more information from them. So Ryan, tell us a little bit more about your book and where they can go to pre-order that, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, so the book is called Broken. It's being published by Forward Movement. You can get it right now as a pre-order at Amazon.com and as a paperback or Kindle version, or you can go straight to the publisher, forwardmovement.org. It's a collection of 30 spiritual essays, so each chapter has a passage of Scripture, and then I explore the passage of Scripture all around the theme of our blessedness in spite of our brokenness, right? So we're all broken. We've all got something going on. But the good news is that Jesus has blessed us before we've been broken and offers redemption in all circumstances. So what I hope is that the book will be inspirational and helpful to people if they've been going through something difficult, and hopefully it'll be a blessing to them, some good news.
And Grant, where can we go to learn out more about what you're doing as well as what Initiative's up to?
Yeah, if you're a young adult or you're in the Dallas area, the nonprofit that we lead is called Initiative Network, and the website's initiativenetwork.org. And or if you're a parent trying to raise millennials, a pastor trying to reach millennials, or a business leader just trying to retain millennials, then you can go to grantskeldon.com, and me and my team do a ton of speaking and consulting for just different leaders on millennials.
And Kerby?
Denison Forum.
Denison Forum, yeah. DenisonForum.org is where I work, and it's this organization where you can go to look for cultural issues and understand a biblical perspective from that. And so this has been August 2nd, 2017, Point of View edition, also known as National Ice Cream Sandwich Day.
And the Millennial Round Table.
And we are so thankful that you joined us, and be back here tomorrow afternoon. We'll see you then.
Why should you become a partner with Point of View Radio? Because for decades, this team has made a significant difference in lives and communities across the nation. Because America is dying for lack of biblical wisdom about life and culture. You should give because your gift will make possible cutting-edge information on issues that matter, information you won't hear anywhere else. Why? Because your gift will change lives, because you'll influence our culture with biblical truth, and because you can make a difference for the future. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Click on Join the Truth Team and choose your level of support. Pointofview.net. Or call 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.